better on socioeconomic metrics, but that's their home. Some argue that the South African whites have also established a home there. There is a real problem in this thinking. I understand their culture has problems and an undesirable state in our eyes, but that's their home. That's actually their only home on the planet. We can't say one moment that a Mexican child who came here at a severely young age who only knows America is their home does not actually have a claim here, while also saying that whites in South Africa only know South Africa as their home. That's from Bob.
Hello, hello.
Bob, I've missed you. I can't even tell you. I have been pining for the Bobness.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt with two things. One,
what happened to your microphone? It used to be so good. It's like you were whispering sweet nothings into my ear. Now it sounds like you're trapped with one arm pinned under a boulder in a canyon.
Wait. 1, 2, 3. How's that?
It's still pretty bad, but we'll survive.
Okay. So two things. I'm sorry, I'll have to interrupt. One, my wife is maybe 1 or 2 weeks away from having our first child, and I am obsessed with peaceful parenting.
Hey, congratulations to you both, Bob. Congratulations. That's wonderful.
I want to thank you for that. I have drunk the Kool-Aid, or not drunk the Kool-Aid. I've maybe thrown up the other Kool-Aid.
You sound ambivalent already.
And the next thing, this is really quick. You won me over at the end of that last call. That was a very good attempt, very valiant effort.
Yeah, because people say, well, why are you talking to this person? Why? I'm not talking to this person. I'm playing for mankind here, Bob Marley style. You know, I'm talking to lots of people. There are some people earlier on that journey who have a chance to turn. I don't think he does, but I appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay, so about South Africa. Well, let's start with you. You've heard the contention, I might say.
That's a brilliant point, Bob. I'd never thought of that, which is not to say that it sounds so vain. You see, every thought I've never had must be superlatively brilliant. But when you say we can't say in one moment that a Mexican child who comes to here at a severely young age who only knows America as their home does not actually have a claim here, while also saying that whites in South Africa who only know South Africa as their home, right? I mean, that's incredible, right? Because that's the whole argument behind the dreamers. They say, well, they came here when they were 3 or 4 or 5. This is the only home they know, and they can't go back. And it's like, but the whites in South Africa were there before almost all the blacks, except for the Khoi or the San people and so on, who have unfortunately been so brutalized and marginalized by the blacks who came down from the north, in particular the Bantu and the Zulus that... yeah, I mean, and the land was taken through trade. It was taken through sometimes the right of conquest, which was recognized by all the African tribes in the region, and it has been massively infused with labor and technology to the point where each farm in South Africa feeds like 3,000 people, which you couldn't get prior to that, of course. So it is a brutal thing. When people say, well, why don't they just leave? Well, then a lot of the families have been in South Africa longer than America's even been a country.
Wait, so when I'm a tiny bit confused. When you say they just leave, you said the...
Oh, sorry. What I meant was people say, well, why don't the whites in South Africa just leave? And the fact is that they've been there longer than America's been a country, right? Some of these Boers, right? Some of the Dutch settlers and the other settlers as well. So it is as much their country as anyone else's. But of course, the story in South Africa, as it was in Zimbabwe and as it was in other places, is that the whites stole the land from the blacks. The whites are colonialists and usurpers, and the whites should just go back to Europe. Because you see, Europe supposedly is the land of the whites. The whites should go back to Europe and should not be in Africa, which should only have black people in it. And of course, that's not considered racist. But if you try and say anything like that about Europe or anything like that, people will just, go insane, right?
Okay, you actually make a good point. However, you have two competing groups in one geographic area.
Which are the two groups?
Just for the sake of this argument, you have the Boers, the original Dutch settlers, or the descendants of the Dutch settlers, and then you have the actual Africans. And you have these two competing groups, and it's pretty clear. I feel very crude saying this, but one, it is simply the only home for one group, while the other group does actually have another home available to them.
You mean the Boers can go back to Europe?
Yes.
Okay, no. So let's break that down. So why are they competing groups? Why can't they all just get along? Why can't they just, right? The Boers have their land, and it's not. See, the blacks don't want the land of the Boers. That's very clear, because the government for many decades has had a whole program which says if you can show that somehow the land was unjustly acquired, even if it was the right of conquest was correct, you can get the land back. And the vast majority of the blacks, they say, well, you can have the land back or you can just get some money. And the vast majority of blacks, like 95% of the blacks who go through that process, just want the money. They don't want the land. So the idea that there's some big competition, like, why? Well, the blacks like to live in the cities and they don't like to farm in particular. And the Boers are excellent farmers. So why could there not just be coexistence?
That I was hoping you'd ask this question. And the answer, okay, so let me go back a little. We have two conflicting ideas, both you and I. We have the idea that culture can replace race as far as a group of people are concerned. But we also, both you and I, recognize the importance of race and how tribal most people are. And when I say most, I mean a vast majority of the people. So this idea of coexisting, I don't think it's, I mean, I did a cursory reading of all the laws, of the apartheid laws. You know, the laws were not nice. They were not nice, and they disenfranchised different groups there. This idea of getting along, there was no attempt, very much like the one in the United States, to create equal rights and opportunity for everyone. Hello?
Yeah, no, I'm listening. I'm listening.
Okay. Okay, so that is why this idea of them, and the reason that we can't get along is because I think, and this is going to be a very controversial idea.
Wait, Bob, we never allow controversial ideas on this show. It's not possible. No, go on.
I think that the whites, that European-based people want it both ways. They want to have the cheap labor, and they want to, at the same time, they want to, quote unquote, get along with the people and create a single society. And that creates problems. That creates huge problems that you see in the United States and that you see in South Africa. Do you understand how I'm saying that's related to this?
I do, but you know, let's deal with the elephant in the room, right? So the IQ issue in South Africa is pretty clear. That the average black in sub-Saharan Africa has an average IQ of 70 or low 70s, right? And that's the bottom 2 or 3% of the white population. So one of the problems, of course, that happened, so at the post-Second World War period, the numbers of blacks and the numbers of whites in South Africa were more or less equal. And now there are 8 times more blacks than whites. And the reason for that is white technology, it's science, it's medicine, it's food production, it's sanitation, like all of the stuff that comes from the higher IQ population. And that's one of the reasons why the vote was not extended to blacks at the time, because the concern was saying, look, I mean, the IQ studies have been known for a long time in South Africa. So, yeah, there was some concern about, well, first of all, once communism took root within the black community, which it did very deeply and very powerfully in the post-war period, and I understand that to some degree, of course, because the communists were saying, well, you're not being treated equally and we're going to fight for your rights, and I understand all of that. But once communism took root, communism teaches such class hatred, and because of the IQ division between the blacks and the whites in South Africa, the richer class, so to speak, was generally whites, and the poorer class was generally blacks. And, you know, again, I think IQ, there's some culture, whether it's genetic or environmental, is not particularly important. That was the reality, and it hasn't budged much in the intervening time. So once the Marxists come along, they say, there's no such thing as IQ differences. The only difference between rich and poor, between whites and blacks, comes about because of exploitation. Because you brought a little bit, I'm not saying you're a communist, but you brought up some of this like cheap labor and stuff like that. Capitalists don't want cheap labor at all. Capitalists want profitable labor. There's a very, very big difference, right? So if you say, well, capitalists just want cheap labor, well, you can get an actor for free to star in your movie, but instead they pay Julia Roberts $20 million. Why? They don't, I mean, they could get labor much more cheaply, but Julia Roberts is a good, or Denzel Washington, if you like, is a very good investment because people will come and see the movie just because they're in it, right? Because there's kind of a quality factor involved in their movies. So in South Africa, because the communists came in and said to the blacks, the only reason why you're poor and the whites are rich is the whites stole all your stuff and stole your land and stole your culture and stole your history and stole your children and did all these terrible things. Well, that's a powder keg. And once the communists get in with that story, they generate such unbelievable hatred against whites on the part of blacks that for whites to then give equal rights to blacks who vastly outnumber them is to sign their own death warrant.
Okay.
Sorry, there was so much in there.
No. That was. I need a moment to consider that, and I'll do that.
Yeah, no, take your time, man. This is that's complicated stuff for sure. Wait, I sound like the last caller. It's complicated.
So you just answered your previous question. You said, why can't they coexist? And then later you explained the massive ability gap between these two groups.
That doesn't mean they can't coexist.
But it kind of does.
Well, only if there are communists in there saying there is no ability gap, it's all exploitation.
Well, okay, but now you're suggesting that people of 70 IQ can understand an ability gap. What?
Oh, well, yeah, that's a point. I don't know because I haven't really worked with many people who have an IQ in the 70s, so I don't really know what they can and can't understand. But I think they can understand the results of, say, an IQ test. They just give everyone an IQ test that's, fair and administered objectively and is not culturally specific, as they aren't these days. And then at least there's some explanation. And you can say to the people with the IQ of the 70s, look, you're not any sadder. It's not like they're happier, right? Because that's so terrible that there's no big difference in happiness between high and low IQ. And so saying, look, okay, they have more stuff. They also have more worries. It doesn't mean that they're happier. You can still have a wonderful life. You can have a great life. You can have community. You can have family. You can have song and dance and all kinds of wonderful stuff. You can have your own culture and great stuff can happen in your life, but you're not going to be an engineer, right? Any more than I'm going to be a pro ball player, right? Basketball in particular, right? So I think if things are explained in a way that makes sense, like when people look at the prevalence of blacks in America in the NBA, I don't think anyone says, boy, there's a huge amount of anti-white racism on the part of NBA owners. It's like, no, they just really good at it.
Right? Let me say this. So your idea about communists stirring the pot, that's basic. I don't think I said capitalists want cheap labor. I said I was particularly talking about lefties and a lot of Republicans who are Republican in name only.
Right. So like the immigration thing. And I agree with that, actually, the immigration idea that the reason why they like illegal immigrants pouring in is it drives down wages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when we go back to that 70 IQ thing, I'd like for you to think for a moment about who is actually capable of having this conversation with you. Who's capable of having the conversation that IQ and race are linked? It's like you and Sam Harris. And I don't mean that.
Wait, the rest of that song, for those who don't know, is Stefan Sam Harris sitting in a tree. KISSING.
No, TALKING about IQ and race.
Right. Okay, but look, there are brilliant blacks all over the world, right? No question, right? I mean, even in America, right? You got an average IQ in the black community of 85 or so, but 20% of blacks are smarter than the average white in America. There's millions of brilliant blacks in America, right? So it's not like you're saying, and in Africa, there are blacks who are very, very smart. Even in sub-Saharan Africa, it's not as many, but they're. So here's the thing. Given that you're not just talking to a population with a total, like the average IQ is in the low 70s, that means that there's lots of smarter blacks. So the smarter blacks can also explain, and sort of, it goes to me down the IQ ladder, so to speak. And this is true of all groups, right? The smarter groups teach the less smart groups, teach the less smart groups, and it kind of trickles down. So I do think there's a way to get all of this across. I'm not saying it's going to be the easiest thing, but if the blacks in sub-Saharan Africa, and don't get me wrong, there's lots of white communists down there too, but if the blacks in sub-Saharan Africa can go with communism, why can they not also go with ability differences? It's not like communism is this totally simple idea.
Because I'm glad you said it like that. Because what is the particular difference between that IQ gap? I mean, I think the number is in the mid 80s, where under that you have an extraordinary problem delaying gratification. And so what are you offering to this person with a 70 IQ? I mean, 70 is extraordinarily low. You're offering them now. You on your side are offering them this answer. Life is tough. You can still be happy. And on the other side, and work harder, and things will likely get better over time. And the other answer is the precise opposite of that gratification curve. It's no. Someone has taken it from you, so we will need to band together and take it back from them.
But isn't that, and it just, by the by, Bob, I just think that's so horrible. Not what you're saying, but this whole, well, here's a group of people, the IQs on average are in the low 70s, so I'm going to gin them up, make them extremely angry, extremely hateful of whites or of groups with higher abilities, even within their own community, right? I mean, you know as well as I do that, and I think we talked about this before, that the blacks of high ability, even in the States, are often referred to, as the Oreos and, like the teacher's pets, and, like they're somehow not black because they're succeeding and doing well. And I think we've talked about all of that before. But what a terrible thing to do, to take this group and just gin them up with hatred and resentment, and then get them to attack the very people who are giving them the food that keeps them alive. I mean, what a viciously cruel thing to do to this group of people.
But this group of people, okay, let's be really clear. This group of people were not totally benevolent, right? The whites in South Africa created laws. They created the Marriage Exclusion Act in the mid 20th century. They created like no immoral or undecent acts across racial lines. It wasn't really the same as what we have here. So what I'm trying to suggest is that it might be substantially easier to gin up the kind of hysteria about which you're speaking. And the hysteria is offering the child candy over spinach. It's saying, look, we can screw that. Your IQ is just the same. You've been robbed. Let's go rob them back right now. Right. Or, sorry, you see how that guy was born tall and you were born short? That guy was born smarter and you were born dumber. And so I think when you say, why can't they coexist? If you, I don't know. I guess you'd have an extraordinarily difficult time eradicating leftism from the world, and good luck with that.
No, I'm almost done. Haven't you noticed? Just a few last pockets of resistance to mop up, I think.
Yeah, it's called basically the entire every large city in the United States.
Isn't it weird how, according to the narrative, Brett Kavanaugh only ever raped Democrat women? Isn't that weird? 50-50, it's just, but never seems to happen. Anyway, the coexistence stuff. Okay, listen, I'm not here to defend apartheid. Obviously, I'm certainly not here to defend everything that the whites ever did in South Africa. No question, no doubt. I mean, there was nasty stuff involved for sure, and wrong and immoral and evil stuff involved. So the question then becomes, how does it play out? well, we know how this plays out because we've seen it play out in Zimbabwe. We know how this plays out. The way it plays out is the whites either get killed or they get driven out. And then the rule of law collapses, international investment collapses, businesses collapse, and starvation sets in, right? This is very clear, right? You get hyperinflation, you get and then what happens is a bunch of often white Western singers go warbling their way across the internet, begging for food, which is really putting a Band-Aid on a sucking chest wound of cultural disintegration. And so I don't want that to happen. I really don't. I mean, this is terrible.
But this is going to sound pretty shitty. That's their culture. That's their home. That's their culture.
I'm not sure what that means. I mean, I know what the words mean. I'm just not sure where that flows.
That's their culture is corruption and concentration of power. To be fair, that's basically the culture of every country on the planet, with the exception of a few European countries, of most of Western Europe, I guess I would say.
Well, no, here's an interesting thing. Sorry, and I forgot because I also wanted to mention this about the deferral of gratification stuff. So yeah, I think it's true that the less intelligence you have, the harder it is to defer gratification, no question. However, I think that's why we need a more free society, because, for instance, the blacks in America, as I've mentioned before, had a stronger family unit than even the whites in the 20s and the 30s. And so what happened? Well, the welfare state came in and you name it, right? Communism came in and all that. And so I think that the less smart you are, the more you need immediate feedback on the consequences of deferring gratification. And I think in certainly the black community had a lot stronger families and a lot stronger work ethic and a lot stronger educational ethic that was doing the black communities in America enormous good up until the welfare state. I mean, the number of blacks, as you know, coming out of the poverty and into the middle class in the 50s was unprecedented in all of human history, and I would just have loved to have seen where that could have gone in history. But I think that people who are less smart can make good decisions regarding the deferral of gratification. They just don't make them in a very abstract way, right? They make them at a more immediate way. And the welfare state, by pushing negative consequences off to economic collapse semi-infinity, it fogs up the signals too much to the point where people can make generations of terrible decisions before the consequences hit home.
I agree. I'd like to say something. What I find strange is that this seems to be happening certainly in Australia. It's happening in the United States.
Wait, what's happening?
Oh, I'm sorry. I said it before I explained what it is. It being the whites are looking around and going, whoa, wait a second. Our culture is changing extraordinarily fast. And there are simply three options that are happening here. Three options that are chosen by the leaders. The prevailing zeitgeist is, it's all fine. All cultures are the same. They're all equal. We love diversity. Okay, we're not going to address that one. That one's complete and utterly ridiculous. The second one is, we will convert them. We will convince them that this culture is the way they want to live. Now, let me give you a little quick story here. I was at a congressman candidate's dinner party, and it was super Republican. Everybody there was old and white except me and my cousin.
Super Republican. I get a very cuck cape vibe, but okay.
And the guy said, he said, we can't deport 10, 20 million people. We can't do that. And then later I raised my hand and I said, the most extreme right, including me, say deport every single one, everybody who's here illegally. The extreme left says make them all citizens. But the middle, and this is really important, the middle says, the middle where we're fought, where we're stuck in this gridlock, the middle is we'll just keep battling it out. But if you look at the birth rates, the middle is the left winning.
Yeah.
And so the Republicans, the non-Trumpian Republicans, are saying, believe that every Latino has to vote Democrat. And I was around a bunch of decent people, so I didn't laugh aloud. And that's really what we are. That's our other. That's
Sorry,
our
you just cut out there for a sec, Bob. You were saying that the Republicans were saying that we just have to convince more Latinos to vote Democrat?
yes,
To vote Republican, you mean?
yes, of course.
Right.
And I think that it's enough to convince them to stop flying their flag here and burn our flag.
This is the other thing too. Again, not to beat the IQ drum, but any time it doesn't show up in these particular conversations is important to note that you got Hispanics who've got average IQs in the mid to high 80s. And if there's a welfare state, they're going to do better voting for free stuff than they are often going to work. Because as you know, like when you start to get round to the mid 80s, it's really, really hard to find productive jobs for people in a modern economy.
Yes.
The jobs
absolutely.
that haven't been automated. Like, I don't have any big magic solution other than it would be great if we hadn't had a welfare state with all the dysgenics involved with that. But the reality is, if you don't talk about the IQ stuff, then you can wave this magic wand and saying, well, yeah, we will get a population with an average IQ in the mid to high 80s to really understand the entire history of economic freedom and independence and worker productivity lines. And, it's like, no, that in general, they're going to do much better off financially just by voting for free stuff. And that puts them squarely in the camp of the left. And that's not going to change magically because you have a good argument.
Yeah, yes, of course.
So what did they say when you put your hand up and said, hey, Whiteys, what did you say?
So, my cousin actually doubled down on my argument, but I would like to, so we had those three choices. Let's go through them really quick again. The left says all cultures are the same. Let everybody in. It doesn't matter. All cultures are equal.
Well, unless any white South Africans want to come in. Then they won't.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's another.
Or even the Hispanics from Cuba who hate communism.
So, yeah, welcome those guys. They hate communism. They hate socialism. But the middle argument, which is the rhino argument of, you know what, we can keep them here, we can convince them. I think that's bullshit. And the last one is the ultra-nationalist argument, which says, if you're going to be here, you will be American, period, or you leave. And I think that one is the only workable solution. And honestly, I think it's the only workable solution in South Africa for the whites or the blacks.
All right. Well, hang on. Just before we get into that, there is another one.
Okay.
So the other one is something like this, and this is not entirely fleshed out, and I'll keep it brief, Bob. But it goes sort of something like this. So you try and convert as many people from being dependent on the government to being productive employees in a largely free market environment. And that way, they become interested in lowering taxes. They become somewhat less accepting of the welfare state mentality because they are now paying for the welfare state rather than benefiting from the welfare state. So there's that aspect. You do put in things like E-Verify, and you do try and make sure, of course, that illegals don't have access to everything under the sun, from healthcare to education to you name it, right? Or voting, even these days. And then what happens is there is, and we've seen this happen before with the economic crash of 07, 08, there's what's called self-deportation, which you know all about, which is where it becomes tougher and tougher to get a job in America. You're not rounding people up, but they're just saying, okay, well, it's too tough to make a go of it here. We can easily go and make a go of it in Mexico, and then they go and they're productive in Mexico rather than staying in America. So there are other ways that you can do it other than deportation or the rollover.
Okay, so that's basically the second one I said. But said more eloquently, I still think it's a pipe dream, and I still think that we'll be speaking Spanish as a first language before that day will come.
+9 for English.
Yes, that's exactly. So well, anyway, this is basically.
But how do you? Sorry, just how do you then enforce the values? How do you say you got to become American or you go? Like, how does that look on the ground?
Okay, so well, you're not gonna like. Well, first of all,
just be frank, man. Just
I have to do the things. The first thing I have to do is the things you just said. So that's step one. Make it not a free ride. Make it, and that's actually, it's not really cheating taking your answer because that's part of our values. I mean, being an American is not being. I mean, I don't know if you know about Dean Alfonge's American Creed, but having subsistence by the government is not part. That is not being American. That is the opposite of what being an American is.
Right.
And so that is step one, basically everything you said. And step two, and this I don't know how this can be done, but we need more nationalism. I don't know how we can balance that with freedom of speech, but we need people who actually love our country and our
Well,
country.
for that, though, you have to uproot the leftists from the universities, and that means no longer guaranteeing student loans and cutting university budgets peacefully and through the free market hugely. Because right now, universities are just massive, swollen, brain-deadening indoctrination centers run by leftists because the government keeps guaranteeing everyone's loans. And so if you get rid of that, or at least give students the ability to discharge student loans like everyone else can through bankruptcy, and that will help a lot. But the idea, I mean, that's a long cultural battle, but the way to start is to really hit the universities and get them to actually face the free market by stopping all of these ridiculous subsidies.
Okay, so you and I aren't in, I guess we're not in terrible disagreement at all, actually. I just think that, I think your way is untenable currently. In this current political climate, it's enough to get the government to stop making us pay for abortion.
Yeah, right. What is it? Planned Parenthood is spending $30 million on the midterms. It's like, why are they getting subsidies at all if they got $30 million to blow on the midterms? Anyway.
That's because we're paying for all the abortions.
Oh, yeah, right.
The eradication of Americans while non-Americans are pumping out all the children.
And blacks in particular, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, the highest is it the highest abortion rates held by the black community in like, I think Candace Owens was saying to me like 50, 60%, I think it was, of black kids aborted in the womb.
In some of the large cities, it's extra. Okay, so, but I'd like to wrap up by saying this. Since that middle way can't work, the longer that second route of doubling down on our values, changing our at least our political culture, the longer that takes, then the fourth answer will happen. And that fourth answer is what white people do every few decades, which is...
Oh, no. No. Do not poke that blonde beast. Whatever you do, man.
That's what's going to happen.
Okay, so what? Just spell it out for people. What do white people do every couple of decades, other than go from being nice to not so nice? But how do you see that playing out?
Well, every couple of decades after they've invited other cultures into Germany and Greece and Italy or whatever, and they say explicitly when the people come in, they say, hey, this place is sweet. I know you want to be here. It's nice. We can enjoy it together. Just be like us. Just act like us. And then eventually after, there's a mosque on every other corner, eventually the whites look around and say, okay, it's time.
Right.
And then they do what they did in Bosnia-Herzegovina, in Germany, and well, it started in Greece. It never got to a big level. But that's what white people do every once in a while.
Well, I think it's fair to say that that's what every group does when they feel like they're being overrun.
Yes, absolutely. But whites are particular because whites are so racist that they let everybody into their countries. So whites are particularly do this. It's different when whites do.
I can't believe, Bob, that you of all people would be so insensitive to the black experience to say that America is a white country. It's a biracial country.
Well, okay, so yes, it is, but it's a European foundation.
Yeah.
So my wife is actually going to test to be a citizen tomorrow morning. And
your wife from Eastern Europe, if I remember rightly.
From Eastern Europe. Her mother's here. She speaks about 3 words of English. And so my cousin and I, we
Hands
all
off,
acted
daughter.
out.
Sorry.
we all acted out the different amendments of the Constitution.
Nice.
And she translated to her. And so what so what I'm trying to say is let me get back.
We were talking about the sort of biracial nature of America, at least for 400 years or so.
The Constitution is a particular document, and I guess fell in love with it, within the last week. It constantly references the powers granted to the people, constantly, over and over. That is something that came from Europe. That is, there's just nowhere around that. That is something that originated in the Enlightenment, and it came and it got codified here with the most pioneering people on the planet.
Right.
And so yes, as far as ownership of the country goes, certainly it's a biracial country. But as far as culturally, it's based in European roots.
I'm absolutely not going to disagree with you with that at all, and I appreciate the correction. Now, so tell me the plan for deportation, right? Because, I mean, that's something that you mentioned, and tell me how that shakes out. I mean, there is that cliche, it's door to door, you're kicking things in, you're checking paperwork, you're throwing people on buses. I mean, how do you see that playing out?
Well, so I don't think it will happen. I honestly think that the fourth choice is what's going to eventually have to happen. And I'm definitely afraid of that fourth choice. But the only plan for deportation that I think could ever work is to actually make it law that any illegal found, all of their property is seized and liquidated and used to send them back to their country. I think that will create a lot of self-deportations.
What about the complications of things like anchor babies with American citizens and all this kind of stuff?
We talked about this before. I don't believe at all that the 14th Amendment, which was created for slaves, has anything to do with Guadalupe jumping over a line and having a baby.
Well, I would certainly agree with that. It's kind of preying upon the evils of slavery to use that to harvest Democrat voters from people who are border jumpers. But, I don't know. I mean, would you just reverse that? I mean, that's I don't know. It's tricky, right?
Well, okay. Yeah. So now you're talking about the practicality, and you're damn right about that. The practicality of that is a nightmare. However, the 14th Amendment reads, I think verbatim, all persons born in the United States and in the state they reside are and under the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. That under this jurisdiction thereof is really, really, really particular. And most people don't really recognize that, because if you read the Article 2, Section 3 of the Mexican Constitution, those people are actually born under the jurisdiction of Mexico.
Oh, right, because they're not citizens of the U.S., but rather are citizens of Mexico.
Yeah, because the Mexican Constitution says clearly that children of Mexican citizens are Mexican. So they are born under their own jurisdiction, not under our jurisdiction.
Do you think that the U.S. will maintain its integrity as a country through this process? In other words, do you think that there could be a breakup?
That's a very good question. And this is why I constantly have this conversation now, because the longer we wait, the worse it is. That's just the way it is. The longer we wait, the more, because I'm having my first child as an old man. And
wait, how old are you?
God, I am 40 years old, Mr. Molyneux. I don't ever tell people my age, but
40. Yeah, okay. So you're not the spryest father on the block. I'm trying to think, how old was I? I guess I was, I was in my early 40s.
I actually am the spryest on the block because I live in a wealthy neighborhood, and they're all.
Oh, so you have all these Anthony Quinn dads.
Yes, exactly. But if you look in the Mexican or the Muslim neighborhoods, oh my goodness.
Oh yeah. No, I get it.
So,
no, just, stay spry. I remember you saying that you exercise a lot and stay fit. So, yeah, I mean, that's all you really got to do and you'll be all right.
Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. But anyway, but back to the core of the conversation is really it is, and as you said, and I loved how you started that speech. I watched you start a speech. The West is the best, but we have to protect it. We have to actually, because the West is going away. And so all of this to say is, if we really believe the West is the best, we have to fight harder to protect it, because it is changing. It is changing, and the people in power are saying, no, the West isn't the best. We're all equal, even though Donald Trump is still the president.
Well, the other thing, too, is the world doesn't agree. Because if we say we're all equal, then why isn't there an equal travel or movement of peoples from various countries and cultures to each other? You know, I'm pretty sure that there are more Somalians coming to Minnesota than there are Minnesotans going to Somalia.
You are one of, if not the loudest voice that I've seen that says the West is the best. We have to protect this.
Yeah.
We have to keep this going. And I'm going to keep repeating it. We have to try much harder than what we're doing. We're fighting a battle where our middle position with the enemy is them winning.
All wars of attrition end in defeat. There's no question of that. And I don't want to save the West as it is. Like, the West is the best, but it's all the stuff we inherited from the past. The stuff that's around now is largely crap. It's largely garbage. It's largely, relativism and leftism and proto-communism and postmodernism, and it's all, I don't know, just garbage. And it's the garbage that's cluttering up the clean pipes of history. So I don't want to go back to the past, because that's not the Western way. The Western way is to have the creative destruction of constant reinvention.
Yes, and the only way to do that is revolution or escape, and there's nowhere to escape except a space station or something.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. Yeah, I mean, this idea we're all going to get to Mars. Yeah, good luck with that. It's not a very friendly thing. And, after communism turns Earth into the red planet, I'm not sure it's going to stop on the actual red planet either. So, so listen, just on a personal level, man, when's your baby due? Was it next week, did you say?
Within the next week or two.
So how you feeling about that? It's a big thing.
I'm very scared. We spent a week. You'll like this, being a programmer. We spent a week doing data aggregation to find the best name. And so what I did was I used.
Is it Muhammad?
Oh my God! No, not the most popular name.
Oh, right. Sorry. The most future successful name.
I downloaded different spreadsheets of salaries and names, and they're pretty clear winners of who makes the most money, how many letters to have in your name, things like that.
Right.
So we're down to 2 or 3 names, and
boy, girl, do you know?
It's a girl.
Well, get ready for some severe affection. As you know, if you're home with your kid a lot, I mean, the daddy's girl phenomenon is very real, and it's a beautiful thing. It really is a beautiful thing. So I'm sure you'll be drinking deep of the cup of daughter love, which is a wonderful thing to experience.
Well, okay, great. Well, I hope to talk to you again. We'll see where that goes over the next decades. But that is a fight which will come to a head. And
let me know. You should drop me a note next week. Let me know what happens with with the birth and all that. Let me know how it goes. And my very, very best to your wife and to you, of course. It's always a great pleasure to chat. So yeah, just stay in touch, all right?
Wonderful.
All right, thanks, man. And thanks everyone so much for listening and for watching this most gripping of shows. Boy, do we ever travel sideways through some topics. But freedomainradio.com/donate. You know the drill, which is to please come and help me out at freedomainradio.com/donate. Help out the show. Those repetitive donations, $10 a month, $20 a month, hugely helpful for planning purposes. And you can go to fdrurl.com/Amazon to do some shopping. It costs you nothing. The Art of the Argument